What's up, friends? Back with another episode of Bonefish, podcast about psychedelic experimental music, Animal Collective, and beyond. My name is Christian. I am here with Justin.
What's up, friends?
Feels good to be potting again. We kind of blew it on a Halloween episode.
Yeah, we blew it.
Which is a bummer.
We had a lot of ideas and we executed none of them. And
You've been like really busy with something. What have you been up to?
I've been just trying to keep a baby alive.
You are a father now. Congrats.
Yeah.
I got to meet the little guy on Halloween.
Yeah, we've got an excuse. We've got an excuse for being delinquent. We banked some episodes. We banked some episodes in the queue for you guys.
Yeah, including today's, which was recorded a little bit ago, actually before Isn't It Now came out, but we've been hanging on to it. But the time has come. We got to chat with Mark Richardson, former editor-in-chief of Pitchfork. Great music writer. He covered a bunch of Animal Collective's albums, including reviews for Merriweather Post Pavilion, Strawberry Jam, Person Pitch, Feels, also Fall Be Kind and Prospect Hummer EPs, and of course tons of great writing on other bands. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, Mark, definitely.
Early champion of the band.
Yeah, early champion of the band. Just one of my favorite music writers overall, you know.
Smart dude, nice dude.
Yeah, and he was down to go deep with us on a Sunday about Young Prayer, which is kind of a forgotten record in the Animal Collective universe, but
yeah,
man, it's been really listening to it a lot.
It's a lost gem for sure.
It's definitely a lost gem. It's
Panda
really
Bear's
good.
First widely available solo album. He's got like the sort of self-titled one that's kind of not really canon, as Mark puts it in the interview. We also get into some stuff about his journey with the band and Sung Tongs. We asked him why Merriweather wasn't given a perfect 10. But yeah, he's really good at kind of articulating what makes this band so unique and special. But before we get to that, what's up, man? You've been listening to anything good lately?
I've been listening to the new Greenhouse album.
Oh, nice. I haven't checked it out yet.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite. I think it's her third record. Really liking it. Probably one of my favorite records of the year. This other group, I think it's a duo. I don't know if it's a duo called Pure Link. Have you heard of their music?
Dude. Yeah, I was just listening to that album. It's great.
Yeah, since we're talking experimental music, that's one of my faves this year.
Signs is the album name, the new album.
Yeah,
it's got kind of like a.
They released two. They released two this year.
Oh, nice.
But Signs is a newer one. It came out in the past month or two. They kind of conjure like the early Y2K, like gas style ambient.
Yeah,
reminds me a lot of who's that guy? He's a lot newer, big ambient artist, Huerco S. I don't know if you listen to him.
Yeah, I've heard some of his stuff.
He's like amazing. Pure Link reminds me of him. But yeah, it's like, how would you describe it? Like, it's ambient, but there's like still beats kind of coming in and out.
Yeah, like ambient house.
Yeah, there you go.
In that zone. That's a great album. I've been revisiting the Deerhoof record, The Runners 4, which just got a vinyl reissue, double LP, which came out in 2005, sort of the era we're talking about in this episode, kind of the Sung Tongs, Young Prayer era. Amazing album, dude. This was Greg, the drummer, and Satomi, the singer, who are kind of the backbone of the band. And then the guitarist John Dietrich, who's still in the band, and then Chris Cohen, who's a solo artist now. This was his last Deerhoof record.
Yeah,
you need to listen to that. It's a good place to start for Deerhoof.
Yeah, I gotta get into Deerhoof one day.
Yeah, man, life's too short to not love Deerhoof.
I did learn some new information about you, though, Christian. Apparently, you covered My Girls in college during like a show and tell.
Show and tell? Talent show, bro. Show and tell.
A talent show, yeah.
Yeah, it was first grade at show and tell. I sung My Girls, even though it wouldn't come out.
You wrote My Girls?
No, yeah, I did. I performed My Girls in college at a talent show, much to the perplexion of my classmates. But my one day wife was in the audience, and even though she hadn't heard of the band, she was pretty into it. So.
Oh wow! Were you guys like? Did you even know each other?
You could say Animal Collective brought us together.
Did you even know each other? Or
No, not
she
yet.
just saw that performance and fell in love.
It rizzed her up, dude. Me hitting those auxiliary drums. Anyway, enough chit chat. Let's get to our interview with Mark Richardson on Young Prayer.
Super psyched to be joined by Mark Richardson. Mark, of course, was at Pitchfork for a long time, about 20 years, starting as a freelancer, managing editor and executive editor.
Yeah.
A lot of great writing, recruited a lot of great writers, and we're really glad he's here. How you doing?
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for having me. I'm doing well. Always fun to talk about this band, and I'm really, really excited to chat about this.
First, I just want to get out of the way. You rejected one of my pitches maybe 10 years ago, and okay. I just want to say it was an honor.
Okay.
That's the real reason for this interview, is to confront you.
All right.
No.
I have a lot of those old emails, for a while. So
please don't look at it. Please don't look at it. Please. It was about the Dead, and it really wasn't for a Pitchfork audience, I don't think, at the time. And but yeah, thank you for responding. Honestly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I did. That didn't always happen, just because there was a lot of email coming through.
Oh no, totally get it, man. Yeah, and Mark these days is the pop and music critic for Wall Street Journal. Before we kind of get into the Animal Collective universe and Young Prayer, which we're going to talk about today, what's it been like, writing for Wall Street Journal compared to Pitchfork? How's it been for you?
Yeah. So, I left Pitchfork in 2018 after 11 years as a full-time employee. And then, as you mentioned, I started writing for the site in 1998. And I still do contribute to the site, actually. Mm-hmm. But so I left there then, and then shortly after that, Wall Street Journal invited me to contribute. And then they brought me on as the rock and pop critic. It's weird. I'm not actually an employee. I do one piece a week for them, and it's a freelance thing. So, I do it's not all I do for work, but it's good. It is very different. I think it's been a real exercise in learning how to write for a more general audience. Just the whole thing of writing when you have to assume, you have 800 or 900 words to get into. I usually review albums for them, and 800 or 900 words to get into this record, but you have to assume that the person reading this has never heard of this band or anything you're talking about. So you have to spend time bringing people up to speed. And I do get to write about I do cover more mainstream artists than I ever would have at Pitchfork, just because that wasn't really my lane. Mm-hmm. But I get to cover mostly what I want to. So often I'm introducing some artists that people have really never heard of. So I like the challenge of that. I just reviewed the solo album, Rami from XX.
Right on.
Just released her first solo album on Friday. And,
that's out. I gotta check that out.
Just came out Friday, and that's a good example where in the realm of Pitchfork, everybody knows who that is. Just say Rami from XX, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, I know the XX." But the audience for the Wall Street Journal, I really had to start from scratch. Who's Rami? Who was the XX? what was the place of the XX, and why is this record interesting? And I have to really work to get all that out of the way in like 200 words. So it's very challenging and but pretty fun in that way. So and then, when I do have the opportunity to write for Pitchfork, which I pitch them, I do some Sunday reviews and other mostly reissues and jazz stuff for them, because I don't write about jazz for the Journal at all. And it is really fun to write for hardcore music nerds. So I really enjoy that too. So it's kind of fun to be able to do both.
Yeah, I love the Keith Jarrett review you recently did. I finished reading it last night while listening to the record, and man, what a great album.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that was so fun to research and write about.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I've liked about your writing, over the years is you kind of seem like a purist, like you really focus in on the sound, what it's like for a person to be sitting in a room and the experience of listening. And to me, you're not so much about backstories that much or kind of what is cool or politics. Do you feel the same way? And do you, today at all, do you feel like maybe an outlier in that regard as a writer?
A little bit. I do feel a little bit like an outlier. And I think that's an accurate characterization. I think like backstory in terms of context, I definitely try to get in there. But I'm definitely much, it's like, it's not even really by choice, but I'm definitely much more focused on the music rather than like the surrounding context in terms of like how this connects with other things going on in culture or, and I really like a lot of that as a reader, but that just doesn't come naturally to me. And it doesn't really like, it's just not really how I experience music. And so I kind of just try to stay true to mostly to how I experience music. Yeah. And, so it's like, it's got its pluses and minuses, but generally you're right. I mean, I kind of try to focus on things at that level just because that's just what feels natural to me.
Yeah, right on. What do you think of Pitchfork these days?
I think they, I'm a regular reader of the site, and I still know a lot of people that are involved as editors. There's definitely a lot of people that are, it's been 5 years now since I was on staff there. So, a lot of people that I don't know at all, but, I think they've done a really nice job. I mean, the site's definitely changed, in terms of the artists they champion and the scenes they champion, it has to reflect who's there, and like who's on staff and, what they're really enjoying. And I think they do a really nice job with that. Pitchfork in general is like, it's very, very challenging to run a music website with so much history, 25 years worth of opinions. And now there's been kind of like two eras in terms of who was in charge, actually more than two really. But
how would you break them down? The eras?
So I guess a couple eras I would say was like, there was the era when Ryan Schreiber started the site, and he did everything. He ran everything up until the first employee they hired was in 2003, the first like full-time employee. So from that period, it was just him doing everything. And then they hired this guy, Scott Plagenhoff, in 2004. And he was the first editorial staffer. I think his title was managing editor then. So it's like 2004 is the kind of the earliest era to 2004 is kind of like the Wild West era in a lot of ways.
Gotcha.
Where, concept reviews and reviews that read like, were actually screenplays and, that kind of stuff. That was all in that era. And it was also like, it was really just like a bunch of friends messing around a lot of times, who were big music fans. And it really, I always thought it kind of grew out of 90s zine culture, which was more like, just more like freewheeling, sometimes more, definitely like, a lot of deserved criticism for, insensitivity, misogyny, like that was definitely in the mix, But anyway, Scott came along and he kind of made it. He was an experienced journalist and he kind of gave it more professionalism. So it's like his era, and then I took over as editor in chief in 2011. And, by that time, like indie music was changing pretty rapidly. So, 2011 to 2018, it's probably another era just because, not so much because of my presence, but just because like indie music in the social media era was really being absorbed into the mainstream in a different way. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're going to talk about Animal Collective, and like they really come from. I was listening to Young Prayer and Sung Tongs today, and both of which sounded amazing. And
nice.
And it's from to me, they kind of like owned the 2000s. It's like, and they've released a lot of good music since, but 2000s they were like in this very rarefied place, and it was just the way that music was distributed and created and discussed. It was just so different then. And the era in the 2010s was a different era for Pitchfork. And then from 2018, Push Patel, another editor-in-chief, and now it's a new era. So I think those are all distinct eras. And it's just very challenging to, and the era that sticks most in people's mind is early 2000s Pitchfork. So when they're like, Pitchfork is when they, especially if they read the site then, that's still what first comes to mind in terms of what they think it is. But that was a long time ago at this point. That's 20 years,
Yeah.
And so it's like, but I do think the site now is really good. It's just adapted based on who's there and what's going on in music.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of to your point about, Animal Collective and when they came onto the scene, kind of concurrent to the rise of Pitchfork and you guys. I'm curious, how did you get into the band? Was it word of mouth? Was it PR person? Was it live? Do you remember the first time you heard them or heard their name?
I do. Yeah. I remember it very well because I was, I think there was a staff board that Pitchfork had in around 2003. And I was also very friendly with a couple of writers. Basically, there were other writers who were there who covered a lot of more underground music, which is pretty much exclusively what I covered then. I wrote about experimental music, electronic music. Like that was just totally where my head was. And I covered a lot of like laptop stuff and finesse and, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And two writers that I was very friendly with were Dominic Leone and a guy named Andy Beta, and I'm still friends with Andy.
Nice.
And I lived in Virginia at the time, and it used to come up to New York sometimes and hang out with Andy with my wife. And Andy was very embedded in the Brooklyn underground music scene, like big time. Right. And he knew he was hanging out, at shows where all these bands were coming up. And so there was this kind of scene then that was, I always think the first Animal Collective album I heard was what's now called Arc and was then called Here Comes the Indian.
Okay.
And
nice.
That it was on Pitchfork's year in that list that year. And I know that both Dom and Andy loved it. And so I heard that they loved it. I checked it out and I absolutely loved it. So that was my introduction to the band. And it was a good introduction because it was kind of fun to be introduced to them before they were kind of as song oriented as they became, and just see because the evolution from one record to the next was just unbelievable.
Yeah, that's where we're kind of different. I mean, Christian and I were Merriweather babies. Talk about what it was like to kind of in real time see this trajectory, which it's like you didn't know where they were going next, and it must have been so exciting and surprising.
Oh my God. It was completely, it was thrilling. So I heard that album and I instantly slotted it very closely with Black Dice. I did
nice.
I'd heard Beaches and Canyons, a record that they did. Mm-hmm. And I actually wrote a 20th anniversary piece for Stereo Gum.
Oh yeah. I read that one.
And I loved Beaches and Canyons.
Wild album.
Yeah, it is. It's great. And then when I heard, I'll just call it Arc because that's what they call it now.
Yeah.
But when I heard Arc, it was like, and of course I knew that they played shows together, and like Dave, you know, if he hadn't yet, he soon would be making music with Eric from Black Dice. They did some things together. So it was like, I was like, oh, they're kind of like a Black Dice satellite band. That's interesting. So, but I could tell just from a few of the, you know, vocal pieces on that album, the one that really stands out is called Infant Dressing Table.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it kind of builds from these clattering sounds to this like huge swell of like voices. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot. They have a lot of tools in their toolbox here because they can sing beautifully too, even though most of the record's not like that at all. And so I was really taken with it. And then, you know, I'm not sure that I definitely bought that, really enjoyed it. And then I can't remember the order of what came out when. And some things were like reissued. So there was somewhere in there was the live album, Holodagon or something.
Yeah,
I've never said that loud before.
Yeah, who knows? Nobody knows Halindagain.
Not many have.
Nobody knows.
Yeah,
How to say that one.
I really like a lot. And, you know, I heard the reissue of that. I don't think I heard it when it first came out, but that was around that time. And
that was 2002. That was 2002.
Okay. It was 2002, but it was a very small run, and it was reissued by Fat Cat, like maybe between Arc and Sung Tongs. But so anyway, I heard that, and I was like, you know, it definitely reinforced the idea that this was this kind of experimental noise band that also did songs sometimes. And then I remember getting the Sung Tongs promo, and you know, I definitely heard that before Young Prayer. I know that.
Had you heard Campfire Songs at that point?
I had not heard Campfire Songs yet. Okay. That was kind of like
exciting.
Yeah, like when I got Sung Tongs, I definitely then I actively tracked down all the stuff that I didn't have. You know, I was pretty late to file sharing because very weirdly, just where I lived in Richmond, Virginia, money was tight, and I honestly just didn't have high-speed internet until very late. I was still on dial-up internet for quite a while, so I wasn't like downloading albums, you know. When I say quite a while, it was probably 2004 or something. So it wasn't like, oh, I like this band, I'm going to get all their records right now. I'd either order them from websites or find them in the record store. So, totally. But when I got Sung Tongs, that's when I was like, okay, I want to get everything they've ever done. And so that's when I got the first two records, and I got Campfire Songs. And once I got Campfire Songs, and then once I heard Young Prayer, and you guys will have to tell me the exact chronology here, but it was all those things were in a fairly short period of time.
Yeah.
And
it went Campfire, Sung Tongs, Young Prayer.
Yeah. So, and all those I think came out within 18 months or something, probably. Mm-hmm. And that was really like their acoustic phase. You know, it was like they were doing things with just voice and acoustic guitar, which is like the last thing I would have ever expected based on hearing Arc first and then the live album. But then you hear like, oh, they're doing unplugged acoustic stuff. And it's like, well, yes, but it's very strange still, but it's becoming more song-like, but it's still like, it's equally as experimental, but now it's like this unplugged, clattery acoustic version, which was just really, really interesting. I mean, I was just like, I think at that point they became like my favorite band.
Hell yeah.
Active band, for sure. And so I was just fascinated by them. I was like, how are, they're doing all these different things, and I don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
And it was actually like looking at it now, especially for a band that was, they were definitely not like big by that time, but they were certainly becoming known. And, but you just don't, it's pretty rare, to just have, to have some success and have a sound that you're known for and just keep changing that much. It was like, it was just thrilling. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, at that point I was definitely an obsessive fan.
Had you seen them live yet?
So I
when did you
had
see him live?
I wouldn't even call this a funny story, but there is a story about that, which is that, so I lived in Richmond, Virginia, and there used to be this print zine that was a quarterly called Grooves, which covered mostly like what was then called IDM. It's mostly electronic music, but it covered experimental music. And I started writing for them an issue or two before.
Mm-hmm.
And then that year I pitched, I was like, hey, what if I interview Animal Collective and I'll do a piece on them? And they proved it. So I guess that was '04 probably. So I was going to interview Animal Collective, and they were going to play this show at this club called Tokyo Rose in Charlottesville. And I was going to interview them after the show. So I was driving there, 70-mile drive, and I got a flat tire.
Oh, no.
And after like 10 miles. So I was like, okay, I got to put my little tire on there, and it was night time, and I didn't want to drive 150 miles on the little tire. So I was like, now I got to get this fixed. And by the time it was all said and done, it was too late for me to go. So I missed that show. And so I didn't get to see him. And then I did a phoner a day or two later, and I did end up doing that interview.
What tour was this for? Was this like 04 or 05? Or?
So they were playing Sung Tong stuff,
okay,
but
both 03 probably.
Yeah, but so I think it was '03 because they were playing Sung Tong stuff, but it wasn't out yet,
Yeah, '03 is when they played a lot of that material.
And my friend Amanda Petrusich, who's now a writer for The New Yorker, she lived in Charlottesville at that time, and she went to that show, and she said it was fucking amazing. And so I was like really bummed that I missed it. But I interviewed them at that after that. That was the first time I interviewed them. And I have interviewed them like 4 or 5 times in various permutations. So I've talked to them quite a bit over the years. But yeah, so I didn't see them then. And I wound up seeing them right before Feels came out. That was my first time seeing them live. So at that point, they had electric guitar and this kind of a little bit more of a rock band setup.
And imagine that was more Strawberry Jam, maybe
Yeah.
already coming out.
It was, I didn't know a decent amount of what they played, but some of it was familiar, and it was really great. And then, of course, I've seen them a number of times since. So yeah, that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of it. And I started writing about him. The first 2 things I wrote was that interview, and then I wrote the review of the companion EP with Vashti Bunyan that they did, which I think is amazing. They've done a lot of those. I think they've, for like 4 or 5 records in a row, they did like a 3 or 4 song EP after the album came out. There was other stuff from those sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's really good.
Yeah, they're always really good. And that one, to me, is particularly good. I mean, one, it was like my introduction to her music. And man, I was just, it was so, and then I wrote about Young Prayer. So I reviewed both of those. And that was kind of my beginning of writing about them. And it was, I think I covered pretty much everything else they released for Pitchfork for the rest of the decade. And yeah, so, when I think of that era, it's there in Young Prayer for sure. And it's there in Sung. It's actually there on all 4 of those records. I kind of think of those records together, the EP, Campfire Songs, Sung Tongs, and Young Prayer. Like, I think of those as, that's like they're different, but that's like a phase to me. And it's a phase when the acoustic guitar was of huge importance to what they were doing. And honestly, you guys may agree or not, but I had never heard anybody use an acoustic guitar like that in music.
I totally agree. Where they make acoustic sounds psychedelic just by
Yeah. And there's many, many songs where they play one chord for the entire song. And it's just like, it's quieter. Now it gets loud, and then it gets quiet. And it's like, it's just the same chord. And then they'll be singing around that. And I'm like, did they invent this? Or it was a very fresh approach to music. I know
very
it definitely
fresh.
drew from it drew from, definitely drew from like West African guitar music and stuff like that, but not in a super direct way.
No, a lot of references, but I think everything, very tastefully, nothing's kind of overtly like a rip off or like
No.
let's get into Young Prayer. We're so glad you mentioned this album. This is Panda Bear's second solo album, technically. It was released on Paw Tracks Records on September 29th, 2004. Wow. So that's almost 19 years ago. And I just want to read you an excerpt from your review real quick here.
Sure.
It's the kind of record that will have a profound impact on a small number of people, be ridiculed by a few more, and never be heard at all by almost everybody. Young Prayer is incredibly personal and naked, but it's also unique, and it will doubtless disappear and be rediscovered periodically as years pass. So here we are rediscovering this album. I mean, I certainly forgot about it, and man, it's been so cool revisiting it. I actually think I like it even more than I remembered it. I think this is definitely the most minimal Animal Collective release in their universe. I think it's their saddest, for sure, and maybe their most spiritual or godlike album. And that's saying a lot for this little album. Yeah, those things stuck out to me, kind of just revisiting it.
Justin mentioned earlier that we were, Merryweather Babies, so our route into the band. And I remember, after my fandom of the group was solidified, going back through the whole back catalog, and Young Prayer, I definitely, compared to all the other stuff before, didn't really grab me as much as some of the other stuff at the time.
Mm-hmm. Same.
But revisiting it now, decades later, and then especially after Justin and I have been doing this podcast, kind of going back through a lot of their earlier stuff, it feels like now it's, sort of this lost gem of that acoustic period, like you said. Like, it sort of has all the hallmarks of what makes those records so great. I mean, you mentioned that sort of asynchronous guitar playing and strumming. We did an episode earlier this year on campfire songs that we recorded around a campfire, which was fun. But we talked about how just what this guitar style of playing seems so unique. And I would love to, if we get the chance to talk to one of the guys again, just when did this first happen? When you guys got together and sort of invented this style, or who were you listening to that pointed you in this way? I mean, you mentioned the West African stuff, but Young Prayer, I feel like now really stands as another diamond in the rough of this particular style of their sound that they really haven't revisited since then. I mean, I think one of the reasons this record ended up becoming, I guess, so overshadowed was Person Pitch was his next solo album that, just blew up and was so stylistically different. I could see Person Pitch fans being going back to Young Prayer and being like, what? If you're not a fan, if you don't understand the language, it would be such a rift. But so I guess pre-Person Pitch, coming off of Sun Tongs, what did you think when you encountered this music, this solo record?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Well, it was interesting listening to it today because, I hadn't listened to it for a while, and, listening to it today, and it sounded very good to me, but I also realized it sounded different coming from the band's past than it does coming from the band's future. And listening to it today, it brought back a lot of good memories around when I was first listening to it. Mm-hmm. But I realized, I was like, oh, this is actually not very accessible music at all. And at the time, coming from their noisier past, and now
even for this band, it's not accessible.
Yeah, they were just getting into this acoustic phase. I was kind of it seemed like I was really comparing it to the abstraction of the past. And so it seemed, because it is pretty abstract, there's a few things about it that really stood out to me listening today. One, a thing that I remember from at the time too, there's two things about it. There's no song titles, of course, so it makes it hard to discuss an album in that way. And even now, as we're discussing it, I kind of wanted to write it down, but I didn't write down all my thoughts of different tracks, because I would love to say, on track 4 when he does this, and I don't have that in front of me. So it's and as it kind of unfolds too, you're like, is this a new song or is this part of the last song?
Yeah. Where are we?
Right. So that makes it hard to discuss. And then the other thing is I was listening, I was like, I think I understand literally 4 words that he sings the entire album. You hear the word rejoice.
Yeah.
told me or lonely or something. But like every once in a while you're like, oh, there's a word I can understand. Like there's literally like the way he sings. It's vocalizations. It sounds very like, I probably mentioned this in that piece, but Gregorian chant. It sounds very like liturgical.
Yeah.
Like, like something you would hear in a cathedral, and like, and his singing almost sounds like Latin, or something like that. His lyrics do. So
Absolutely.
it's like, oh yeah, this is not very accessible at all. Like it's pretty strange music. And, something I remember talking to some people about in the time after that, which I can't remember if I put this in my review or not, but it really brings to mind in some ways Arthur Russell, World of Echo. If you've ever heard that album, like that's an album that he recorded with just his voice and cello. And it's like, he has this album is like shockingly dry in terms of the recording. There's like a lot of it, there's no reverb at all. And honestly, like a lot of it, like he's kind of out of tune, or even like, is there a scale that he's tuned to? It's hard to say, you know what I mean? But it's like, to some people, I could be like, oh, okay, yeah, this might sound out of tune. But I was thinking of that Arthur Russell album and how, that's just his voice and cello. And it's also like, you listen to that and you're like, okay, this kind of sounds like a structured song, but it kind of doesn't. And again, you can't understand the lyrics at all. There's like, it sounds like he's singing words, but I don't know what they are,
it's almost like the album is so kind of like arrested by grief, or that all he can do is sort of emote and sing things that don't even sound like words or have these loose structures. And that in itself is just beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't heard it, of course, this was given at the time with the press materials, so it made its way into pieces that were written. But obviously, the word "Young Prayer," that title does invoke the Beach Boys. I mean, they have a very well-known song called "Our Prayer," totally. And not that it sounds like the Beach Boys, of course, but he's always rightly compared to Brian Wilson in terms of his vocal tone and stuff. Yeah. But this, this album was recorded right when it's around the time that his father died, and he recorded it in his childhood home, either just after or right around the time of his father's passing. So, and it's, it's basically an album about that. So it's an album about loss, and an album about grief, and it's wordless. And, that gives it like, there's a couple moments of levity in there. But it does sound, it's very, very naked, very like vulnerable. And that's why like his voice isn't perfectly in tune. It's cracking. Can't really understand the words, but, it does convey emotion, and it kind of conveys that like the helplessness of that kind of moment for somebody.
Yeah. I think he played it for his father on his deathbed too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. He's playing those songs while he was dying. And so it's, it has this very heavy, story that goes with it. And it does, if you go into it knowing that, it does feel that way. It doesn't feel like, you don't hear, young love, or, like it's got a very like mournful vibe to it. And a lot of that comes in how he sings.
Totally. Yeah. I think when I first encountered this music, which at the time for me probably would have been like 2010 or something, I think my only other analog for it was like Sigur Rós. I was like, he's not singing words, but he is singing word-ish things, but it doesn't have sort of the grand sweeping orchestral stuff that Sigur Rós had at the time. And I think that plus the sort of just sadness surrounding the record made me, I guess, a little reluctant to click for me. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the accessible thing. I was just rereading your review. I was like, I think you called it extremely accessible. I was like, oh wow, I wonder.
That's funny.
But it's funnily one of the things with this band though, like because they started sort of so far left and have kind of made their way more and more accessible. It's like with each of their reviews, it's like, oh, this is Animal Collective's pop album. No, wait, this is Animal Collective's pop album.
Or that last one's actually quite experimental, but it's totally, that is the way it felt when it unfolded too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, his voice, I mean, it's funny. I've been reading these Westerns like during the summer, like Western novels. And listening to this album, I was just reading this book about the Comanche Indians. And I'm sure other Native American cultures had this too, but often if they knew they were about to die or going to their deaths, or maybe like on the way to war, they would sing a death song, a lot of them. And I'm not sure if it was like an individual song or if it was like sort of by tribe, but yeah, it's sort of the wordlessness, the chantiness of this, and yeah, the nakedness, obviously the associations with the death of his father sort of brought that to mind. I mean, you get the sense that this band has been influenced by, Native American ethos and sort of, just something that popped to mind revisiting it.
Yeah, it's totally. There's this like monastic quality, which that's the stuff that I think really ages well for this band. Sometimes I'm like, am I like getting too old to keep listening to like, Animal Collective? Or I feel like Young Prayer is kind of the adult, almost like Animal Collective album, or, it's the influences it draws on, like you said, the Gregorian stuff, even like Baroque stuff. It just like really seems to age really well. But and Mark, I know you talked about this idea of, comparing the Beach Boys to Noah's music and the band's music, and how they kind of conjure this feeling or idea of God or something deeply spiritual. But Animal Collective they're not ones for like composing, traditionally, or I think you said they're not ones for like composition like Brian Wilson, but they still get it and they get there. Yeah. Can you just like kind of talk about like those feelings that both bands kind of evoke, this kind of, this like like deeply spiritual monastic feeling that is really, really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Some of the things that really draw certain people to the Animal Collective, and when I say that, I'm always including their solo stuff too, but I kind of think of it as one big thing.
Definitely.
But some of the things that really draw people to it is also, it's often like the same things that repel people. And I feel like they were a rare band that really works from a more like instinctual place, rather than, some like another artist that I really like who I've written about a lot is Bill Callahan. And, he's somebody, he said in interviews that when he goes to make a new album, he writes the lyrics to the entire album, puts it all in order and gets them exactly perfect. And then he starts thinking about the music. It's like, that's how he makes albums.
Wow. Insane.
So it's like, you think of this one extreme where it's like this, get up every day with the pad and pen, say everything exactly how you want to say it, then start working through the music. And it's like this kind of very like methodical approach. And Animal Collective is really it's very like, there's something like very instinctive feeling about it and very like responding to the moment and being in the moment. And I mention that because like, one of the ways that manifests itself really throughout their whole career, but especially during this era, is like these kind of vocal arrangements that they speed up, they slow down. They're like yelping and maybe barking, and it is very like, you do sometimes imagine like kids who are playing and they are, running around in the woods and making sounds, and like sometimes the music sounds like that, and I think of like that kind of approach to music is very spiritual, because it's very much about like honoring like the moment and spontaneity. And it feels very like there's very much like a celebration of life to it. And I know that's
very physical.
It's very physical. It's very, it's like the way that they make music with their hands in terms of how they're strumming guitar, and also with the way that they're using their voices. It's like feeling the pleasure in making sounds. It's like,
yes.
oh, I made a different kind of sound there. That's going to be in my music now,
Yeah.
And I think of that as pretty spiritual in and of itself, because like, the funny thing about you guys, I'll have to go back and listen to your Campfire Songs pod, but that also is a very spiritual sounding album to me. And it's always been like that was recorded on a porch in the woods. And there's always, I think, because of, like, at this time, Animal, they were like wearing masks, putting on face paint, and their shows had the feel of these rituals, and there was something very, like, pagan about it, or like Wicca, or it's like
join our cult.
Yeah, and, like, to me that in itself is deeply spiritual, and Young Prayer is a little bit more formal than that, if only because it's definitely, like, it has some very clear restrictions to it. It's like it almost all sounds like live with guitar and voice. There's some overdubs here and there, but a lot of songs have no overdubs. So it's got some, like, it's not very produced. It's very much, like, captured. So it draws attention to itself a little bit as, like, a sound of someone in a room doing something, as opposed to somebody making a record where you're in a control room and you add layers and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know, like, it's all of it, I would say, is very spiritual music, but Young Prayer comes at it from a slightly different angle, and obviously has the content of the spirituality is different because it deals with something very specific. That's a bit of a ramble.
No, I mean, no,
That's great.
I'm very interested in this subject, and it feels like also in terms of spirituality, it's hard to be present these days, and music is one of the few things that, helps me be present. And I feel like, especially their music, it's kind of, like you said, Mark, celebrating the moment right now, whatever it is, kind of, and that is spirituality. And it's just a great feeling, I guess.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on, I love that you brought up sort of his kind of the pitchiness, quaveriness of his voice, of Noah's voice on Young Prayer. I feel like one of the reasons it holds up so well is that it's like, I like that you said the word captured. Like, it does feel captured in the sense that you're in there at the room with him, but you also feel like you're sort of with a musician who's beginning to discover kind of like what he's capable of in terms of, like, with his voice and just with recording. Like, when in our Campfire, for the research for our Campfire episode, I remember reading that Noah, his main memories of that time are kind of him realizing, like, him starting to sing, going from being a drummer and playing guitar in the band now, and then also singing. And he quotes something like, I was starting to do something I didn't realize that I was capable of doing. And it was really exciting. And I feel like on Young Prayer, maybe obviously sings a lot on Sung Tongs, but again, is probably not someone who thought of himself or was trained as a singer at any point up until sort of he kind of learned while being in this band. And I think Young Prayer, you sort of hear that happening, like to feel so excited about your, like, new skill, but to be able to sort of, like, record it and capture it kind of as it's being refined, as it's, like, sort of blooming, I guess. I think it's a really cool thing.
That's it. I think that's, that shows up a lot in their music, is like, you're kind of discovering what they are at the same time. It's kind of this sense of arrival or discovery. Which is, and they're really
capturing
cool.
The process too. They're not capturing, like, the most crystalline produced thing. He didn't wait till he could have, perfect pitch to do that album. It just came out of him. Obviously, that big emotional event happened that sort of prompted this monastic, like, response. But yeah, I just thought of that, Justin, when you said this sounds like Grown Up Animal Collective, because at the same time it has that just, like, unmistakably youthful kind of innocence, but, like, courage also. Like, they always have the sense that, like, we're kids singing songs before we even have the ego to, like, be able to think or feel things about them, kind of, in a way.
Yeah, and it's got some of the most, like, straightforward music in the Animal Collective universe. I think that one that's, like, a minute long, it's kind of the most upbeat part. It sounds like a Charlie Brown song almost. It's like piano and guitar. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, that track?
Yeah,
definitely.
That's, like, just
It's also the one that's most clearly overdubbed and like sequenced, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I always think of that as it's like a breather among all this heaviness. And it's just something, this very simple, very pretty thing. And it's like, if I didn't mention it in the review, I've thought of it since, but, it's like being around someone who's dying, which I've done a few times in my life at this point. Hadn't ever done it when I wrote that review though. But, it is this mix of like heaviness and pain and anguish, and then moments of levity and laughter too, and so it's like in some ways he captured the proportions of that pretty well, you know what I mean? There's 9 songs and one of them is this, it's almost like that song you can imagine like laughter happening, so it's like, it does have this ability to like mix it up a little bit too. And I feel like that's in the mix during those kinds of experiences too.
Definitely. I think, it's funny. Encountering that song out of context, it's almost like I sometimes wonder if it's going to get, like added to a Spotify playlist at some point and just like skyrocket up. It's become one of those random B-sides that like
I know
the algorithm decides to champion.
Yeah. It could have been like an iPad ad or not iPad, but
what was that first one?
Those old devices. The iPod, like an iPod. Remember the iPod music?
Oh yeah,
thing in the 2000s, and it almost has that like feel to it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you guys gave it an 8.5, which is, I think you also gave Tomboy an 8.5.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. Obviously, Tomboy is kind of the more high-profile album. Do you like basically stand by your score, your review, or to what?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. Like, I mean, we definitely we talked about how this acoustic period after hearing, there were definitely like little elements that kind of hinted that this could come from the earliest stuff, but how this seemed like a pop move in some ways, relatively speaking. I'm not talking about Young Prayer specifically, but this like period of their music, and then like what came after was equally fascinating, especially what came after for, I loved Young Prayer, of course, and it kind of like I thought, like, I can't really speak to its influence and how much like people have taken it up as like something that inspires them in music, but it definitely like among Animal Collective fans, it does kind of like people. It does get forgotten pretty easily, and I kind of thought that. Yeah. Like I did mention that was a possibility, but and it's for obvious reasons, but then I'll see it connect with people, so it's probably had an afterlife pretty close to what I would have guessed it would be. And I do think it's a very, very special record. Sometimes it's nice to like, it does have a high score on it. And at that time, I remember very clearly, like during the whole rise of Animal Collective, especially when I was writing about them a lot of my peers who also wrote about music and also just people I knew in general, like there was a lot of, dislike of them.
Yeah.
And, it was very strong. And so I remember at the time with Young Prayer saying like, God, I think this is amazing. And some people were like, oh my God, that's some of the worst music I've ever heard.
I had a roommate. I was playing this album. This is a few years ago. And he's like, what is this yodeling shit?
Yeah, totally. And, and like, I've long been interested in I like music that exists at the borders of what music is, and I think this album does that. Sometimes, I like a lot of electronic music where it's like barely music, I just think there's something really fun about that. So I do think this captures that well. And, but then thinking about, what came after this, of course, like, so it was like Young Prayers, at that time, if I knew he had a first album, I don't think it even circulated on file sharing at that time. I know it has since, and I have listened to it, but it was the first tape or whatever was very, very obscure. So
Yeah,
for all
I think
intents
it's
and
sort of
purposes, this
yeah,
seemed
it's
like
counted as juvenilia. Yeah,
yeah,
sort of.
totally. It's not really canon, but so this being his first solo album, and then like when he started releasing these singles and the lead up to Person Pitch, it's like, oh my god, he's now it's doing this and it's totally different.
Yeah,
And
wasn't it like only a few months after? Because it wasn't the first songs for Person Pitch came out in '05. Do I have that?
that sounds right. Yeah,
So not too long after this, he was already switching it up.
totally. And that stuff was hugely exciting for obvious reasons. And yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, I'm not in Comfy and Nautica. I'm looking. I have Wikipedia open, but that was September 2005. So
Wow,
almost exactly a year later.
almost a year. But I didn't realize the singles came out that ahead of the actual album.
Yep.
Yeah. No wonder it kind of vanished then, Young Prayer. That's such a quick follow-up, yeah.
Yeah, and so like when that was coming, it was also again so exciting. And then Bros was the next year, and then there were a couple singles just before Person Pitch, and Person Pitch was very obviously super accessible relatively to what it came before. And so there is something so interesting about that when a noise band becomes a song-oriented band and they're actually really good at it. It's like that happens sometimes where it's like, yeah, they don't really do that so well.
It's usually the reverse. Like like Radiohead, band like they'll start off in a center pop direction and then they'll go to the left.
Scott Walker.
Animal Collective did it in reverse, and I don't know. Can you guys think of any other bands that kind of did that? Or artists or
it's hard for me to think of ones that did it successfully off the top of my head anyway. I mean, another one that kind of did it in reverse is Tom Waits, like him in the 80s. He got very experimental in the 80s after being kind of a conventional singer-songwriter in the 70s. But it was just a fascinating progression, and then eventually they got more experimental again. Like I don't know if you guys have done an episode on Meriwether Post Pavilion itself, but
not yet. We're saving.
But that was I mean that was like of course I absolutely love that record too, and but that was really like there was a very strong like where can they go from here kind of thing when. You kind of felt that before, but then it kept going, more and more in this direction. And then now suddenly it's like a song that people play at their wedding and, and it was just like, it seemed crazy. And,
it broke containment.
Yeah. They didn't keep doing that. They went on to other things once again. And so it was like, I mean, when you hear new albums coming, you don't know what it's going to sound like,
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist along a spectrum as much as it did at that time, where it's like it wasn't like up and down. It was like kind of going from, it's evolving and changing, but like generally moving in a certain direction, which was interesting. As opposed to like, they weren't putting out. It was just like, it all felt organic and worked together, but it was like you could feel the changes, feeling it was like shedding skin or something. It was just really interesting.
I think that, that's what's cool about them. They'll always surprise you whether you're on board with it or not, which I think is cool. I wanted to ask you about Merriweather and what kept you guys from like giving it a 10? Like what stopped it from being a 10?
Well, it was in the conversation, and at that point, like the 10 for a new release, it had been so, it was something that I'm kind of glad that Pitchfork has since broken it, but it was something that was, I think we were just afraid to do it, because Pitchfork, gave 2 10s in 1 year, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot and the Trail of Dead album, both got a 10 the same year. And then there were no 10s for a long time after that. And, until the Kanye West album. So like, I think like, it was just like, it was really just that, we talk about it and then it was like, well, there's we kind of like lost track of like what is a 10 in some ways. And, it was, it's like, oh, there's some songs that maybe aren't quite perfect. So maybe it's not a 10, or
we should
something
say,
like that.
Yeah. For the record, it was a 9.6, right? I think.
Yeah. 9.6. Yep.
For America, that was just
Spiritually a 10.
Damn
good.
Yeah.
10.
And that was like, it's not related to what we're talking about, but just a quick story about that review.
Sure.
You probably heard that, there was all this anticipation and then like a song leaked, and you know all about that story. Maybe you even experienced it at the time.
That was a crazy period.
Yeah. But it was an exceedingly hard promo to acquire. And, it was just, they were at that time, like very concerned with leaks, and they really didn't want the whole album to leak. And so, it was just like, they really had it locked down. But I remember I got it right before like Pitchfork took a Christmas break or a holiday break around December. And so my wife, Julie, and I drove from Chicago to Virginia because we were going there for holidays. And I was just like listening to it in the car, and I had my laptop. And it was an amazing experience because I had like the copy that had been sent to Pitchfork. I'm sure I had ripped it for a couple people, but I wasn't in the office anymore, so I wasn't talking to people. And like, I really did, I worked on a lot of that review when I was driving with her. I was riding the passenger seat, and then I would play her songs, like, check out this one. I would like play it car stereo and then put my headphones back on. Nice. And it was like, I loved it so much, but it was just such a like powerful experience because I felt like I was the only person in the world who was hearing it, so it was like, it was just a weird, now if I hear something, even if you have an advance, I'll say, hey, have you heard this record? Oh, here it is. And then I'll talk to somebody on, text or whatever. But at that time I just had this record, and like, it was just me and the record, and, no social media, no one in the office even to discuss it with. And I wrote like really, really long. I probably wrote like 2,000 words or something. And eventually turned that into what the review was. But it was just a very memorable experience, and, obviously like powered by just how much I love that record. So that was fun.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That period was crazy. There's like people trying to get in the band's phone number and calling them and trying to get the leak. And I think it actually
Brian's, they hacked Brian's email maybe. And I think the album actually freebirded, I think, on Christmas or something. Yeah,
maybe?
That sounds right.
And
at that time my review was done, I think, pretty much. Yep.
Yeah. But I remember Collected Animals, people were just, it was crazy. That was the very beginning. A lot of joy during that period.
Yeah.
Well, Young Prayer does turn 20 next year, so maybe we can send the word out that, we need a reissue, repress.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. Would love to have that weird album art on a big LP.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did just want to read, I'm sure you're a huge fan, Mark, of having your music writing read back to you, but
no, that's fine.
I did just want to read one more part of this Young Prayer review, and it's the Beach Boys part, which I loved discovering this because, the Beach Boy comparisons with this band are sort of everywhere, but it's, sort of hard to explain to people why. Like, I remember when I first was like playing my dad Animal Collective, I was like, hey, like Beach Boys-ish a little bit, but it's like Panda Bear, like the purity of his like tone is sort of Brian Wilson-esque, but it doesn't really sound like Brian Wilson to me, and like the arrangements are all different, but I loved what you wrote in this review because it feels to me like sort of like the skeleton key for that kind of comparison. And I'll just read it quick. It says, Animal Collective's relationship to the Beach Boys is unusual, as they don't seem particularly inspired by Wilson's compositional sense. More than anything, Animal Collective taps directly into the thing that made the Beach Boys a 20th century American version of sacred music. It's an approach in which voices say more with music than they ever could with words. And it's why the Beach Boys transcend their dorky lyrics as easily as Animal Collective transcend unintelligibility. So I thought I'd just share that with our listeners, because to me, that hits it right on the nose, that sort of mysterious relationship between these two artists.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Right. That sounds familiar.
Do you feel like they downplayed the kind of Beach Boys connection? I feel like they're much bigger fans than they let on, I think.
Yeah. They did for quite a while anyway. I mean, sometimes with his latter day solo records, it seems even more unavoidable, especially like with the last record with Sonic Boom, which I thought was really good, that Panda Bear did. Reset, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that they were working in this like loops from songs from the 60s, and the melody's very upbeat. It's like pretty undeniable at that point,
It's the catchiest thing they've done, or Animal Collective members. Yeah.
And not that you can trace to any specific song or anything, but like this idea of this high voice that does invoke sunshine. I mean, just because we've been trained, it's like, I would say like, we've been trained to hear Brian Wilson's, falsetto and say it sounds like sunshine because we know the story of the Beach Boys. If we heard that sound in isolation and we'd never heard of the Beach Boys, wouldn't necessarily say that sounds like sunshine, but we've heard that, and like he definitely has an element to that in like the grain of his voice. And so it's like, it's almost like if you grow up hearing the Beach Boys or grow up listening to the radio, it does seem pretty unavoidable just because of the vocal tone and so on. But yeah, of course, then there's plenty of music. It's funny because like Feels, there's really nothing on Feels that you would use to describe that way. And I know that's more like Dave's album.
Yeah.
But so it varied over time, but sometimes it seems, like very clear.
Yeah. Part of me wonders if the dudes will ever sort of steer back this way into the kind of more, I guess, acoustic, more experimental side. I kind of thought we might get something like that with Buoys before that record came out. Didn't end up being that.
Yeah.
But who knows?
I don't know if you guys caught the Sung Tongs tour that
yeah, I did, yeah.
Dave and Noah did, but I thought that was like amazing.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
It was like as the tour, as the shows were announced, but I saw it in Brooklyn, but I didn't really know how it was going to come off until I saw it. And I was like stunned at how well it came off. And it reminded me, it's like, wow, they really could like do a version of this again anytime if they wanted to. You know what I mean? Because like two guys, guitar and a bass drum, it sounds this good, and they can do it, but just they're interested in other things now. But I was like, it really
hard to get them to go back.
It was so many, I guess it was 20 years later, but yeah.
I sadly missed that tour, but luckily, I think it's the Brooklyn show's video. They took a video and it's on YouTube, and there's literally people like moshing to two guys with acoustic guitars. Like it is, the energy is just at a boiling point. It's phenomenal. Yeah,
it seems like the revisited Sung Tongs tour was more faithful to the record, whereas the original live material in like 2003 it seemed a lot more just kind of wild and way looser.
Right.
And the record ended up being this kind of very beautiful, a little more in hushed tones recording. But what's this band's legacy, Mark? Or like, how do you think of them today?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like as a touchstone for other artists, and just they don't have the like currency in terms of conversations around indie music that they once did. Mm-hmm. But I think I can't believe that bothers them, because it seems like they were never really driven by that, Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, you hinted at that, the first quote you read from the Young Prayer piece, but like sometimes it's very easy to feel like whatever feels like is the case in this moment in music is probably the way it'll always be. But the truth is that like things are constantly going in and out of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And, in the 2000s, there actually were like a lot of new bands that came along where you're like, sounds like Animal Collective. And
Yeah.
and then they might interview them and they're like, yeah, we love Animal Collective. And so like at that time, there was some of the spirit of their music was really something that other bands were attaching themselves to. And you could almost just tell that like an audience of Animal Collective fans might be interested in something else. I mean, even though they sound nothing like them, but you guys interviewed Dustin Wong, and like, I know that people who love Ponytail at the time tended to love Animal Collective too. I mean, I guess if nothing else, like the vocal style for the person in that band, like, you know, it was, of course, never understood any of the words. And it was, there's definitely like a connection there between what we were talking about of like making sounds and the feeling of delight in how you can make sounds. And so, and there were other bands of that era that conveyed some of that. And then for quite a while, really like post Merriweather throughout the 2010s, that's just not where indie music was, you know? And at that time, it would probably be like, there was like a little bit, never for me, like I've never stopped listening to their records and enjoying them, but just in terms of like this, what was going on at the center of, you know, I exist in a music critic's world, so I'm always thinking about music critic conversations, but also the way that those spill out among like music fans and social media. But there was a feeling in the 2010s of like, oh yeah, that was then, that was of its time. You know? But then as time goes on, it's like these things always go through cycles, you know, and it's like, I think they've like come back into the conversation in a way that since then. And so I think their legacy will always be like in flux, you know, depending on like what part of their career and what part of their sound is being referenced, and also what the values are of whatever's at the center of the independent music conversation at a given moment. But I definitely think people will be listening to and talking about these records for a long time.
Yeah, in terms of like modern bands, I feel like 100 Gex kind of reminds me of Animal Collective a little bit, just kind of the hyper modern exploded sound. For sure. Thanks for, revisiting Young Prayer with us. When should people listen to this album? Like, what's a great time or place, or like what if we,
I think of it as, a nighttime album, and I definitely think of it as an album that I listen to in solitude.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever listened to it with another person, actually.
Oh, interesting.
And,
Same,
so
actually.
I think like an evening alone, an evening alone over a stereo, not in headphones, I think would be a good way to start with it.
Nice.
Yeah, agreed. It's also, it seems like a Sunday album too. I don't know.
Yeah, could be.
I just want to say, thanks for championing this band, Mark. I know Justin and I have enjoyed your writing over the years about this band and many others. It's also been cool as people who sort of came into the Animal Collective fold around Merriweather to go back. And one thing I love about your reviews is you just feel, obviously it's all at the time, but you are pretty in lockstep with the band, and some of your reviews end in pretty prescient ways. Like, I read the Water Curses EP review, which was the last one right before Merriweather, and you can kind of tell that they're like on the springboard, sort of ready to blast off. But thanks for when other people were making fun of Young Prayer. Thanks for sticking up for it and just this band's music in general. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for asking me to be on. I really appreciate it. It's fun to talk about. I haven't talked about some of this stuff in a long time, so happy to do it. And I'll definitely go back and check out some of the other episodes.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thanks, man. And definitely check out Mark's work if you haven't. He recently had a Sunday review for Pitchfork, for Keith Jarrett's album, which is really great. And you could check him out in the Wall Street Journal too.
Right
on.
Get by the paywall.
Yeah,
I'm a subscriber.
Paywall, so that's tough to see. But
I'm a subscriber.
Yeah. I haven't read the Time Skiffs review yet because I got to borrow your account, Justin.
I think Mark liked it. I think Mark liked Time Skiffs. Right?
Oh yeah. I was very into it.
Yeah, and we appreciate you coming on our little startup podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the time on a Sunday. We appreciate it. Cool.
All right.
Well, take it easy. Cool.
Definitely.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Take care.
That's it for today. Thanks a bunch for listening. check out our other episodes if you haven't. We just interviewed Deacon on our last episode. We spoke to A.V. Tear earlier this year. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, we're on Instagram at bonefishpod. Shoot us an email at bonefishpod@gmail.com. And until next time, take it easy.
Bonefish.